Hi everybody, in this video we are going to calculate the radius, circumference, and area of a circle given the diameter. So here's the problem. The diameter of a circle is 55 yards. So here we see a picture of a circle, and we're going to pretend that the diameter here, which is obviously very small on the screen, we're going to pretend that is 55 yards long. And we want to figure out what the radius of the circle would be, what the diameter, what the circumference would be rather, and what the area of the circle would be. And we're going to use 3.14 for pi, and we will show our work. The first one we're going to do in this video is find the radius. Now, looking at this picture over here, which is sort of like a map which tells you how to get from one part of a circle to another. If we are given the diameter, then we can follow this little road over here going to the radius. And I don't know if you can see that says divide by 2. So the arrow is pointing from D to R, and it says divide by 2. And that makes sense because the diameter is from here to here, but the radius is only from here to here. So the radius is half as big as the diameter. So if I know what the diameter is and I want to know what the radius is, I can just take the diameter and divide it by 2. So that's what we will do, and we will show our work. We're just going to write 55, which is the diameter, divided by 2, and that would give us 27.5. So over here, we're going to write 27.5 yards, and we will box our answer. So hopefully that makes sense. If the diameter is 55 yards long, then the radius, which is only half of that, would be 27.5 yards long. Now, we also, one equation that I don't have on this picture, and actually I forgot to mention it in the other video, but D equals 2 pi r says that the diameter is twice as long as the radius. Another way that we could have answered this would be to plug 55 in for D and then solve for r by dividing both sides by 2, and that cancels out there. And then we would get, again, r is equal to 27.5. And if we were something which I should have mentioned in the other videos, if we are given the radius and we want to know the diameter, we can plug the number in for r and then do 2 times that and figure out what d is. The reason why I don't really use this equation so much with going from diameter to radius or radius to diameter is just because it's so simple just to divide by 2. If we're given the diameter and we want to know the radius, we just divide by 2. And it's also so simple if we're given the radius and we want to know the diameter, we'll just multiply by 2. Going through the whole process of writing the equation and plugging in and solving for something as simple as that is just a little bit too time consuming. So you could do it if you want, but I don't usually do it that way. So now moving on to circumference. If we are given the diameter and we want to know the circumference, then we're going to follow this road over here, which is named C equals pi d. And of course that makes sense to use this equation because this equation has both d and c in it. So if I know what the diameter is and I'm looking for the circumference c, then it makes sense to use this equation over here. So let's write that equation, c equals pi d. And we're just going to plug the 55 in for the diameter. So we'll replace the d with 55, and we're going to write c equals pi times 55. And over here I wrote that we want the circumference in terms of pi, which means with the pi still in there. Okay, and so basically we're done. I'm just going to reorder this. Instead of writing pi times 55, I'm going to write 55 times pi. And let's just put the units in. circumference is one-dimensional, just like diameter and radius. So that's just going to be yards, not square yards. Okay, and now let's go ahead and do the circumference without pi, which is pretty simple. We're just going to do 55 times pi, and we're going to use 3.14 for pi. So let's write 55 times 3.14. And you can use the calculator for that. I'm going to. That is 172.7. 172.7, and I'm going to write it again over here. And I think I mentioned this in the other video, but when you're doing the activity on your own, I do expect you to show your work, but if you want to just go ahead and write the answer over here, instead of writing it here and then again over here, then you can just do that. You don't have to write everything twice like I'm doing it, but you do have to show your work. So I need to see how you got that answer. All right, so, oh, you know what I've been forgetting to do? So let's just review. If we know the diameter, we can find the radius by dividing by 2. Okay, so that's what we saw in the little picture going from diameter to radius following this arrow. That was that one. And then what we just did here was, if we know the diameter, we can find the circumference by using c equals pi d, because that has both d and c in it, so that's the correct equation to use. Okay, and now we're going to go back to the picture, and if we know the diameter, how can we find the area? Now, there's no direct road going from diameter to area in this picture. And that's because out of all the circle equations that we learned about in previous videos, none of them have both d and a in them. So if we know the diameter, we're not going to be able to figure out the area by using just one equation, or by just doing one step. We're going to have to do a couple of steps. So this is the route that we're going to take to get from D to A. We need to sort of go through R, and then from R, we can take this road over to A. So our strategy for getting from diameter to area is to divide by 2, and that's going to tell us what the radius is. And then once we know the radius, we can use this equation, a equals pi r squared, and plug the r in over there and to figure out what the area is. Okay, so that's our strategy. And now let's scroll down over here. I'll just leave that on the screen, even though I forgot to do it for the other ones. So if we know the diameter, we can find the area by first dividing by 2 to find the radius. And then once we know the radius, we can use a equals pi r squared to find the area. Now, I'm not going to redo the work for this part because we already did it over here. We divided the diameter by 2 and we got 27.5 yards as the radius. So we already did the first step here. I'm just going to write the second step over here now. So I can write a equals pi r squared, and I'm going to plug not 55 in because 55 is the diameter. Here for r, we need to be plugging the radius in. So we're going to plug 27.5 in for r, and then everything else stays the same. So a equals pi times 27.5 to the second power. And let's go ahead and use a calculator for 27.5 squared, which just means 27.5 times 27.5. So we're multiplying it with itself. Another way that you could do that, if you happen to have this button on the calculator, is to do 27.5 and then hit that squared button, and it's just going to do 27.5 times itself. So we get 756.25. So the area is 756.25 pi. Don't forget that pi is still there. And that is going to be our answer in terms of pi, which just means keep the pi in that answer. So let's write 756.25 pi. And since area is two-dimensional, we're not going to write yards, we're going to write yards to the second power. It's not plain old yards, it is square yards. Okay, and now let's just go ahead and write our answer without pi, which means we're going to multiply this by pi to get that pi out of there. So we have 756.25 times, we are going to be using 3.14 for pi. Okay, I already have it here, so times 3.14 equals 2,374.625, and that would be square yards. Okay, so you know what? I'm not going to write it. I already have it over here. Let's just box that. All right, okay, good. So you know what? Let's put everything on the circle over there. I didn't do that, right? So I put the radius on there, and then just to remind everybody what all these things are, this over here is the circumference. The circumference is the length all the way around the circle. Okay, so the circumference was 172.7 yards, and then the last one was area. So the area is the space inside, measured in square yards, or whatever units we're using, square centimeters, square inches, whatever it is. In this problem, it's square yards. Okay, so the area over here was 2,374.625 square yards. You don't have to write all of that and shade it in and everything for the activity. I just like doing that to remind everybody what these things are. Okay, all right, so that is it, and have a great day.